Hey, everybody. I've had a number of people asking me recently about my breathing methodology and my breathing methods that I use during sparring, fighting, training, whatever the case may be. So what I'll do is I'll make this video for that reason and with that purpose in mind. Noting that to be clear, this is not for the virus. I mean, there are already seemingly tried and true methods that are on the market done by professionals who've been in the trenches that are making their way around, and they know firsthand what works. So my recommendation is to seek those out as well, because they have ground level experience within that context. So what I can say is that what I'm going to give here is for strengthening lung capacity, for being able to monitor your daily breathing in a more efficient manner, and to pay more attention to it. So what I'll do here is first I'll go over terminology and different methods, explain them and give examples, and then I'll finish up at some point with a routine that I do during jogging to put it more into clear perspective for you. And if there are any questions, people can let me know. I'm going to try and stay away from scientific terminology or science in general, explaining complex terms and things like that, because frankly, that's not my lane. And I prefer to stay in mine. So I'll try and make this as simplified as possible and easy to understand without getting overly complex. My credentials on this, well, I've done Qigong and Tai Chi for over 20 years already. I've studied motor skill and aerobic and anaerobic capacity. I've studied various forms of breathing and meditation separate from that Chinese martial arts experience. So it's been a thing for almost a quarter century that I've paid close attention to, because I find that there's a direct correlation with your manner of breathing and your performance levels. So that being said, remember that the goal is to start forming a correlation between your daily activity and breathing. So what we'll start with is there is this discrepancy between nasal and mouth breathing, and which is more effective. Like I said, most of this, if not all of it, is going to be from my personal experience. So opinions may vary, results may vary. Certain levels of the scientific and medical community may vary in terms of what they believe, but I know from my performance what has had the greatest effect and been the most efficient for me. So, I mean, for me, nasal breathing is something you do throughout the day. In through the nose, out through the nose. It's very simple. So, I mean, when you're meditating or you're going through your daily rhythm, nasal breathing is fine. There's no problem with it. The thing that I try and pay more attention to within that dynamic is that I take deeper nasal breaths than I usually do. The problem is that most people breathe in a very quick, rapid way throughout the day. That doesn't fill their lungs up with fresh air faster. They have less recovery period. So, I mean, I find that doing that nasal breathing throughout the day and trying to lengthen those breaths, both the inhale and the exhale, keeps you in a more calm perspective. Gives you greater time to make decisions and analyze and assess thought processes. For combat or exertion elements, I find that mouth breathing is far more effective, simply by the dynamic. In through the nose, out through the mouth. For me, when I'm under exertion, whether it's through cardiovascular exercise, sparring, grappling, whatever the case may be, It aids in a quick recovery. It conserves my energy for longer. And I've also found that as I'm aging, it helps make up for deficits in stamina from the other person and from the demands of the actual situation. It refills the lungs with fresh oxygen much faster and more efficiently as well. So I find that that's kind of where I distinguish. If I'm exerting, I go combat breathing. If I'm during my daily rhythms, I do nasal breathing. There are 3 types of meditation that I do as an offshoot to that. I do clear mind meditation. Most of these, I guess, would be considered Western. I do clear mind meditation, where all I focus on is making sure that my mind is free of thoughts, free of negativity. And the longer you do it, the more you're able to control that aspect, including throughout the day, apart from meditation entirely. I do sense meditation, where I focus on each of my senses. So, I mean, for a 5-minute period, I'll do visual meditation, where I only focus on motion. If I'm staring straight ahead, I'll focus on the different multi-levels of motion that are going on. Cars going by, people moving in my peripheral vision, branches from the trees moving from the wind, bugs flying by, my dog being in the vicinity. So it's all visual. Auditory. I'll close my eyes and I'll focus only on the sounds. And I'll try and multi-layer those sounds in a multi-skilled manner, so that if I can pay attention to the wind blowing, the car moving, voices in the background, honking on the street, people active inside the house, the more multi-layered you can become, the greater your focus and attention becomes. And finally, I do kinesthetic. So I'll close my eyes and tune out my ears, and I'll just focus on both the external kinesthetic, things that are like the wind blowing on my skin, a tree branch brushing up beside me, you know, how I feel in the position that I'm sitting in, and then the internal kinesthetic, what my emotions are doing, how my feelings are that day. Am I letting them go? Without getting too metaphysical here. So that's sense meditation. And I also do contemplation, where I'll think about various things throughout that are going on in my day or going on in my life. And some of them cause an internal reaction or trigger or kind of a physiological response. And the longer I think on those and try and control those responses, the greater I am at not reacting to outside stimuli. You learn to, as these thoughts come in, be less and less triggered and control physiological response, including breathing and tension in the body and whatnot. So those are things that are very important. What types of breathing are there out there? A lot of people utilize a lot of different forms of breathing. So what are they, first and foremost? We have what's called autogenic or circular or tactical breathing. You'll hear about all 3 of these terms, and inevitably they're the same. Which one you utilize and what rhythm within that framework is dependent on you. What are you most comfortable utilizing? We have within that, we'll call it tactical breathing. Within that tactical breathing framework, we have square breathing, where you'll inhale for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4, inhale for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4. So now, whether you want to add a hold in there, I find that the hold, like a 2-second hold in there, also helps with loading and helps with containing that rhythm of breathing. So if I go in, hold for 2, hold for 2 on the end, Hold for 2 at the top. Hold for 2 at the end, or at the bottom. I'm breathing out so that you can actually hear me breathing, paying attention to that. Rectangular breathing would be 4 on the inhale. You can hold for 2 if you'd like. 2 on the exhale. Hold. Inhale for 4. Hold. Exhale for 2. Noting that you're not holding those remaining 2 breaths. When I'm inhaling for 4, and on that 2 count exhalation, I'm exhaling all. Holding. Holding. Paying attention to that. Not a lot of people mention that, and I think it's important to note. Triangle breathing is 3, 2, 3. So if I would inhale for 3, hold, exhale for 2, hold, inhale for 3, hold, hold after the 2 count exhale, inhale for 3. So we have square, rectangular, triangle. Which one you utilize is not a matter of effectiveness, it's a matter of how you adapt and what is most comfortable for you. Remember, this is a comforting thing and a recovery thing, so it should be within what you feel most comfortable with. We have what's called burst breathing. Dependent on the activity and the person, it's for exertion. So if I've really exerted myself, if I'm running and doing an anaerobic burst, and to define that quickly, anaerobic in a nutshell means without oxygen, aerobic means with oxygen. So an activity that you would be doing anaerobic would be wind sprints or burst grappling, something within those lines where you're exerting full energy and then having to recover quickly. Aerobic is like a consistent level of maintained activity, but not past a certain point. You're still breathing comfortably, or at least the most comfortably that the activity will allow. So just to get those terms out of the way. So back to burst breathing. There are 2 methods that I utilize, and it's dependent on the level of exertion. So if I'm going fairly low exertion, it can be deep and firm. And what these are designed to do is recovery is fast. And I'll explain this later when I do my running routine. So I mean, as the lactic acid builds up in your muscles, the workout is designed to gradually wear you down. I'll just let the plane pass overhead. My workouts are designed to wear me down gradually. So recovery is a big part mid activity. So I mean, if I'm doing something that's, you know, a little bit lower in exertion, it can be deep, one big deep, and then a firm exhale. So, I mean, we can compare that. So in like a sniffle when you have a cold, and out like I'm either blowing out candles, or you can do the shh method. I find that even a 5 count of this improves my recovery period exponentially and in a much faster period. And the other would be short and rapid. If I'm really exerting hard and I'm starting to exhibit signs of hyperventilation breathing where I'm and I can't catch my breath, the short rapid burst breathing, where we call it sipping. You'll take sips. So if I'll do that for 30 to 35 seconds on a recovery where I'm doing a 4-minute consistent period and then a 1-minute anaerobic burst, that 30 to 35 seconds helps me recover almost fully. And I'll explain that a little later as I do the jogging routine and put it in motion as well. So burst breathing, high exertion, faster recovery, 2 types. One, deep and firm, if you're not overexerting. If you're exerting at a very high level, short and rapid. The deep and firm, 5 count usually works for me. The short and rapid, 30 to 35 seconds works very well. Meditation breathing, we've already talked about, nasal. So now the next question is where to breathe from. What are the levels of breathing? I use 3 levels of breathing, and it also depends on exertion. If I'm doing meditative breathing, I'll breathe through my abdomen. It exhibits greater control. It calms the body much faster and inhales good air much better. So you'll see my stomach expanding as I breathe in. And we'll get into the differences between those two in a minute as well. If I'm breathing through my abdomen, or if I'm breathing through my ribs, you'll see my mid-chest level. So low, mid-chest. My mid-chest expands as I inhale and relaxes as I exhale. And to see if you're doing it right, you can put your hand there, right? Abdominal. Mid. Chest. As we exert at higher levels, it moves upwards in the chest, right? Upwards in the dynamic here in the torso. Whereas if I'm really exerting hard, it moves upward in the chest naturally. And that's where we get to, in Qigong and in Tai Chi, we always heard the Buddhist and Taoist breathing. To me, that's a very simple explanation. It's usually overcomplicated excessively to make it look like it's some special skill. Buddhist is normal, or what they call prenatal breathing. So when I breathe in, the element expands, right? When I breathe in, when I inhale, my stomach expands. When I breathe in, my mid-chest expands. When I breathe in or inhale, my upper chest expands. Taoist is the reverse, right? So when I inhale, my stomach is going in. When I exhale, it expands. Okay. Buddhist, normal breathing. Taoist, reverse breathing, abnormal breathing. Both have their efficient usage, right? When we are exerting heavily, that high chest is inhaling, is moving inward, compressing as we inhale, right? And expanding as we exhale due to panic. So we can incorporate that method of breathing into the hyperventilation breathing to control it in a much faster method. What else do we have? We have loading or leading. So if you're going to do an exercise, you're going to take a short inhale before that move. So if I'm doing push-ups, for instance, I don't know if we can see that here, but right before the motion, I'll take a quick inhale. Okay. For a punch, I'll take a short inhale or load before I'm exhaling. And what we've learned in Tai Chi and Qigong, that transfers to other whatever martial system or combatives or fight system that we utilize, is that my motions are usually exhaling as they're leaving the body or going outward from the body. So in Qigong, that's how it is. I'm And the same is true that you'll learn in boxing too. Exhale on the. So we load, right? I'll take a little bit of air in. Okay, we call that loading or leading. Either one is fine. So you're inhaling just a tad, a 10, 15, 20% clip. Move into that exhalation, into that shot. And for most of you who've done any fight training, you'll know that when I'm extending is usually when I'm most open to counter. So if I'm exhaling, it's not a surprise shot. I'm already tensing my abs and my chest and my muscles as I'm exerting and going outwards. So if I get a counter shot in return, I'm not losing my gas. I'm able to absorb it in a much more efficient manner, as opposed to holding my breath and getting caught with a shot that drops you, right? Anybody who's done boxing or stick fighting or any kind of impact training will, is familiar with that concept. So we're just putting it into the breathing dynamic. So as we exhale, we're most vulnerable when we're firing something outwards away from the body, right? We're not prepped and preparing for incoming attack. So as I'm exhaling, to limit my vulnerability to having those shots dropped when I'm holding my breath, okay? So, I mean, the goal, what we're doing here is we're timing breathing with incoming and outgoing shots. If we're doing it for daily rhythm, remember the goal is to start forming an anchor from something as simple as walking or movement and on your steps to breathing. That's what we mean by daily movement, timing your breaths to the pace of your walking. That's a good way to start getting in your rhythm. So for every step with the left, I breathe in. Once you start feeling comfortable, you can do it for 2 steps. So every 2 steps I take, I inhale. And the next 2 steps I take, I exhale. So you're starting to work on that rhythm and strengthening your lung capability and paying attention to your breath throughout the day. Holding your breath is another method. So just to quickly review, we've had autogenic or circular or tactical breathing with the square, rectangle, and triangle. We have burst breathing for exertion, for a quicker recovery period. We have meditative breathing or daily breathing. It's very similar, with the goal being to try and lengthen those inhales and exhales throughout the day to relax your system in a much greater level. We have 3 levels, breathing from the chest, mid-level, abdomen, depending on the activity. If it's a high-level activity, you may be forced, at least periodically, to breathe through your chest. As the activity lowers, so too does the level of breathing lower. We have loading or leading. It can be for regular activities like we saw with push-ups, or it can be through combat. That applied to the stick as well, right? Knife, whatever your thing is. We have holding your breath. This can be potentially dangerous, and if it's done for an extended period of time or often, it can actually damage the system. It can cause arterial blockage, apparently. It definitely can cause hyperventilation and panic and higher levels of anxiety throughout the day. So, I mean, we have to pay attention to that. One of the things that I was taught through the martial arts element was to holding your breath to replicate an adrenal dump. I mean, it's especially now when we have the pandemic and social distancing and isolation and quarantine and all these fantastic words that are making their way around. This is probably the closest way that we can get to replicating at least some elements of adrenal stress response. So what you can do is I hold my breath for a period of time and exert for as long as I can. This is anaerobic, right? So holding the breath. If I'm going to do something like, let's say, just hitting the tire, right? I'm going to hold my breath. The one thing I can do is take small sips until I have no more sips left to utilize. But from here, holding breath. So now you're seeing two elements utilized together. You're seeing holding your breath and burst breathing. The average person can apparently hold their breath for 35 to 45 seconds. So it's something that you can test to build lung capacity. But what I do is I want to make sure after that I'm not tense and in hyperventilation mode. So the minute I stop the activity and I've hit my limit, I'll go into burst breathing immediately. You have to go down and take a knee in the beginning, or it's too much, or go at a slower pace, or your exertion capacity is not particularly high in the beginning, it's fine, start slow. So what we do is we're exerting power and energy as we're doing that anaerobic burst. The goal is to tax yourself and then to test recovery. This should be done a little bit later on when you're comfortable and have developed your method of breathing and increased your lung capacity already. So, I mean, you can go as long as you want. You can go a minute. If you can push it even further than that, great. But remember, this isn't just holding your breath. You're exerting energy and force while you're holding your breath. So this isn't the average person holding their breath for 45 seconds. This is somebody who's trying to hold their breath for that 45 seconds or more while utilizing movement and power and energy and muscle usage. So when you recover, you're trying to recover as fast as you can. And you can see that here. I'm not breathing like this when I'm talking. So the recovery was pretty smooth and pretty fast. As you start practicing this, you can extend it a little bit further, see how far your limits go. So like I said, holding my breath. We used to do it in a martial context of throwing a tire as far as we can, running up to that tire and circling it while doing shadow boxing, while holding your breath until you couldn't anymore. When you knew you were right at that last cusp of capability, you'd pick that tire up and throw it back to the original place and run back like a wind sprint back. And after 3 or 4 of those rounds, most people are totally gassed. But they learn valuable lessons on exertion, conserving energy, when to explode, when not to, how much energy you have in the tank. That's a huge advantage when you're sparring or doing martial arts or in a self-defense scenario, is knowing how much gas you have in the tank and what your upper limits are, when most other people do not. So there's benefits for that. There's benefits for daily life in terms of staying fit and being energized. Number 7, sighs and 1 deep breaths. I do a lot of those during the day. If I'm breathing poorly, or even when I'm doing a workout and I've regained my breath, that extra sigh, sometimes it's conscious or voluntary, and sometimes it's involuntary. But that sure helps throughout the day. Pardon me. Sighs are a regular part of overlooked breathing. they happen for a very particular reason. That little sigh can cause a trigger of normal breathing again. I find that when I'm stressed and I'm breathing very erratically, or I'm triggered throughout the day, and I have that one deep breath, or the automatic sigh, it causes a conscious shift of me being able to connect again to my breathing. And I go, oh, okay. It's a connector. And if we start seeing it as such, we start understanding that that sigh is there for a very particular reason, or that one deep breath. Sometimes it's not best if you're in a confrontation with somebody that you love to do it mid confrontation, because it looks condescending. But if that's what helps you, and you can leave the room for a minute and go, just give me a minute to clear my head. I just need to calm down a little bit because I'm getting wound up and I don't want to say something that I regret. And I go in the other room and I take that sigh, or that one deep. You'll realize that you come back in a much calmer way, and it triggers that regular cyclical breathing, circular breathing that you use to calm down normally, or your meditative breathing if you're capable. So I hope I'm connecting all of these dots. I mean, there's a lot of overwhelming information in the breath community, but I'm trying to simplify these terms as much as possible. If there's any confusion, I'll try and clarify it with the routine that I do later, or if you need to reach out, that's fine. And a thing that I do, getting back for a minute to the holding your breath thing, two safer ways that you can work on that, getting back to that, two safer ways that if you want to start off a little slower, I usually do in a vehicle on long road trips. When I used to give the security guard seminars, I'd usually have to travel for 2.5, 3 hours. So what I would do during that time would be two things. One is holding my breath limits. So I'll set the timer on my cell phone. I'll pull over on the side of the road and I'll set the timer on my cell phone, and I'll hold my breath. So I'll take one big inhale and hold and set the timer. And as I'm holding, I can exert a little bit. Once I feel that this is becoming too tense and unmanageable, I'll take a little sip out. I'm doing it quicker so that you don't have to suffer through 45 seconds of me doing that. But you get the idea. So that holding your breath limits with little sips, and set the timer. See what your lung capacity is. And over a couple of weeks of this, you'll see improvement gradually. And the second one I'll do with a timer is how few breaths you can take per minute. So set it and see what your average is. I mean, some minutes will be different than others, or you'll find that you overexert or overextend your capability for the first minute. And then you're doubling yours in the second minute, which is fine. It's all about understanding yourself and your capability. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world. But the most effective is the most comfortable. So how few breaths I can take for that minute. So if I'm going, hold, when I can't inhale any longer. And then you can gradually exhale. And then we start the second minute. And it takes a while to make those continued breaths congruent, right? So inhale, hold, exhale is one breath. Okay, so how few you can do in a minute starts building your lung capacity. Okay, so those are two little tricks that I do while I'm driving. Somebody else can hold the timer if you want. You can set the timer in a very safe way. And It can be done while sitting at home. It can be done if you pull, the best recommendation is to pull over. So, I mean, those are things that you can do to increase lung capacity and get you comfortable with holding your breath and taking fewer breaths per minute and extending those inhalations and exhalations that we talked about before. What are some other things? There are terms that become very complicated. Autogenics, to me, autogenics is just being aware of your various body parts. I try and stay loose throughout the day. So when I get triggered or when I get really tense, as I've said in other videos, there are 3 things that usually happen that I notice. My shoulders lock and go high. Right? My neck stops moving and I get that singular focus on the thing that triggered me. All of my attention goes to that thing. And my feet stop moving. And as you can see, even in this video, I like to keep my feet moving constantly. So when they're not moving, it's because I'm stressed. And I have to pay attention to those things. Autogenics means that I'm putting that attention there, where if my shoulders are tight, I start going, okay, I gotta loosen that up. Right? If my neck stops moving, the first thing I'll do is peripheral. I'll loosen the muscles in my neck and start being loose with it. Start getting rid of that tension and that stress. Feet, if I'm locked in position, I'll start moving. Right? Even during seminars, you guys that have taken seminars with me or workshops or webinars, you'll know that I do a lot of pacing and prowling during the class. I like to keep my feet moving. So autogenics is paying attention to various parts of your body that happen to be stressed, because all of our body often isn't stressed. There are certain parts of our body that are affected physiologically from stress faster than others. Those are the 3 that I notice in me, and my breathing stops. Once my breathing is back on par, I usually notice the other 3 naturally fall into place anyways. But just a case in point, right? Know your body. And if there are certain parts of your body that are super tense, pay attention to them. If your feet are really tight or you're white knuckling, loosen those up, right? That's to me what autogenics means. It's a more specific explanation for the elements that go into mindfulness. Mindfulness is general. How are you? Right? Are you super tense and stressed? Be mindful of your states throughout the day. Be aware of how you're feeling and your physiological responses and your breathing and those things that are tense during the day. Mindfulness. Be aware. Biofeedback is this complicated term that's used in a multitude of different scientific ways. I use it in a very simplistic way. I put a heart monitor on when I'm jogging, and I want to see what my heart is doing when it's anaerobic bursting or when it's aerobic and consistent within my comfortable frame for my age and my body and my weight. So biofeedback is just using a heart monitor, even throughout the day, to find out what your resting heart rate is, what your active daily heart rate is while on the move, and during training. What I used to do to test how I was recovering was put on a heart monitor and have one of my students grapple me. He wasn't trying to submit. We weren't playing that game, but he would burst. He would try hurting and punching and grabbing my throat and throwing body punches and knees and things like that. And I want to know how I'm doing with that kind of feedback coming in. It can be a little bit excessive for some people, but it's one of those things where you're really learning what your body is capable of as an engine. Am I panicking when he's attacking me? And can I lower that somehow? What's my heart and my blood pressure doing while he's doing this? Is there a way I can lower it through any of these breathing methods? So that kind of biofeedback to me in my training has been invaluable. When I've done full contact stick fighting, there are times where I've worn a heart monitor where I go, okay, when I'm really bursting, what am I doing? This is stand-up, so it's a little bit different of a dynamic than grappling, and you're conserving energy in a different way. So what am I doing? How am I responding to this? And it can be regular daily activity that you go for a jog or you're doing a physical training session or circuit training. So just be aware of that. Hot, cold. I come from Canada, Manitoba. So the Canadian and Manitoban winter was brutal. And there were times where you got freezing cold if your truck died or if you were out in the cold for an extended period of time shoveling. So, I mean, you can call this what you want, but in visualizing you breathing from your arms into your hands and having them heat up. And you can start off from here and continue to. It takes a bit of belief, but there were times where when we were really cold that it really worked and your hands warmed up. It's nothing metaphysical or magical. It's believing that your hands are getting warmer and really putting all of that attention in there. It's like an intense visualization. So hot, cold, right? And then there's what you'll see a lot of the metaphysical garbage that's going on out there, permeation with chakras and points on the body and breathing through the soles of your feet, supposedly rooting yourself into the ground, 10 feet beneath the ground. What I consider that is simple visualization through intense focus. They're placebos. You're not actually breathing through the soles of your feet. You're not actually going 10 feet into the ground. But the intense visualization and focus and calm that that creates takes your mind off other things and lowers the tension in the body, both actually physically, right? If we're doing something like qigong, it actually lowers the level of that tension and stress and creates an element where you need to visualize intensely. And if you're visualizing on something other than the thing that's troubling you, it's effective. There's nothing mystical about it, though that seems to be the garnish that everybody puts on it. But just to explain certain elements that go on in the breathing community. Now, to finalize, what I do is I'll go for a jog for 45 to 50 minutes, sometimes 60 when I'm feeling frisky and energetic. So what I'll do is I'll do 4 minutes of pace. I'll try and keep a consistent but fairly high level pace for 4 minutes. And I'll monitor what my heart rate is doing. And the level of my breathing is dependent on what I'm doing. I tend to do something that makes my wife fairly angry, and I go out when the heat is the highest, when it's 25 to 30 degrees, midday to 2 in the afternoon, because that's when I find it'll be the biggest battle of attrition for me. As a disclaimer, I put on a hat and sunscreen and all these things, but I go out when the sun is at its peak. I want to really test what my system is doing. I stay hydrated with water, but I go out because I want the conditions to be against me, to see what my system is capable of doing. So what I'll do is I'll do 4 minutes of pace, where I'll jog at a consistent period of time, monitor what my heart rate is doing. If I'm really gassed and the sun is very hot, you'll know that I'll breathe through my chest. If I can, I'll breathe mid-level. As I cool down and lower down my pace, maybe I can move it all the way down to my abdomen, showing a greater control over my breathing. For those 4 minutes, I'll breathe in, keep the pace, and I'll usually time it with my steps while I'm running to get into a consistent rhythm that feels comfortable for me, so that I'm not erratic all over the place with my breathing, and it's yet another element that I have to focus on, making that a very high stress event. So on the last minute, I'll burst, and I'll do burst breathing for exertion, with as much containment as I can. If you can time that with your steps as well, that's great, right? The longer you can do it, the better. And then I'll have a 30 to 35 second recovery, where I'm doing that intense burst breathing to get back into rhythm. So I have the regular breathing, the burst where I pick up that pace, and then the recovery. So I'll do that for about an hour, between 45 minutes to an hour, rotating between those two. Meanwhile, I'm doing biofeedback and I'm checking what my heart rate is doing and making sure that I'm okay and my heart rate isn't exploding. I'm monitoring the levels of my breathing and where I breathe from. I'm doing autogenics and I'm noticing, oh, my knees are really tightening up. That's going to hurt. I'm going to have, some pain tonight if I don't loosen that up. So I'll start paying attention to my knees and start changing my pace and lowering the impact on those knees. Or if there's tension in my right shin, and I'll feel it because it's overcompensating for something leading up to a potential injury, I'll lighten that up. So, I mean, those are things for me that I have found to be very effective. And it's very formulaic. I breathe, after 20 years of this, I breathe instinctively based on the level of exertion that I'm putting out. And it's very formulaic. I know exactly what kind of breathing to do when I'm doing this. We hiked up a mountain a while back and I had a hiking stick. So every time I planted that hiking stick, it's just getting you comfortable with your own breathing and monitoring it, being aware of it, conscious of it throughout the day, and conscious of your body and what it's doing throughout the day, and what methods are most comfortable for you. Okay? So we've gone over all of this terminology, which is made out to be far more complex than is usually necessary. I'm not going to get into specific Qigong routines, but what you can do simply is, if you're going to do one, keep your feet about shoulder width apart. What we call Wu Qi is making sure that from your head down to your feet, or reverse, everything is loose and relaxed. And I'm going to breathe in. And when I extend something from the body, I'm going to breathe out. If you want to work that to something that's functional to your activity during the day, let's say you do boxing or martial arts. Or if you want, do it out of something of motion. Right? You're seeing I'm loading already. If you want to double up and add combinations in, it's just something that you extend on the other end of breathing. But I'm rhythmic. Whatever that pace may be, I'm connecting that breathing to the exertion, whatever that exertion may be. So the more familiar and comfortable you become with the type of breathing that you do, the rhythm of breathing that you do, and the type of breathing with the stimuli coming in and how your body is responding throughout the day, the more calm you'll be, the less reactive you'll be, the more in control of trigger response you'll be, and the more responsive to conflict and potential violence and aggression as well. And now the added benefit that we're seeing is that with the virus, there's huge validity in strengthening the capacity of your lungs and understanding breathing mechanisms. It can potentially be a lifesaver. And like I said, if using this kind of breathing, or what works comfortably for you with your method, or that you've taken from this video, if anything, you're building that capacity to lead into the other thing. Should you catch the virus, then you can transfer that increased capacity and capability to the methods that have been shown tried and true to work already, that are making their way around. And again, I urge you to seek those out from medical professionals that have seen the most effective breathing methods on the ground level with people that have been suffering from this. I can't stress that enough. So breathing is one of those hugely complex things that's really very simple. So I wanted to utilize this video to go over a ton of those terms and explain them in a very rational way. In a very simplistic way that average people can start utilizing them functionally. We hear these terms thrown around with kind of reckless abandon in varying levels of complexity from different people, and they needn't be that complex. To me, something like biofeedback is just monitoring what my heart is doing under the duress of that particular activity. Autogenex is just paying attention to specific body parts. And you can go all the way down, shoulder, right? Biceps, elbow, forearm, hands, right? You can pay as much attention as you want and go all the way out through your body. Mindfulness is that general state. How am I? Am I super tense? Am I super stressed? Just being constantly aware of your body and your states and the thoughts in your head. That mind castle that we talk about, protecting the bad thoughts from coming in. So from a martial perspective and not just a breathing perspective, I hope this helped glean a little bit of clarity with some of these breathing methods. For people who want to reach out and understand a little bit more, or some of these things were unclear, you can always reach out to me via social media or via email. It's not a problem. For those of you who have my WhatsApp, that's another method. So I just wanted to explain this in some clarity. I hope you guys got something out of it. If any clarity is needed, I can definitely expand on this in further videos. And let me know your feedback. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you're good and relaxed and not triggered. Have a great one.